Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Technical Details about the AAOE Data Warehouse. Before we get started, I have just a couple of housekeeping notes to review. First, participants have audio access only during the webinar, so that means you're able to listen to the presenters, but you can't speak to them or to other attendees. Secondly, if you have any questions or comments, please type them in the chat box in the bottom right side of your screen so panelists can address them throughout the webinar. And now I'll turn it over to our facilitator for today's webinar, Cecilia Sepp.
Great, thank you, Amanda. Welcome to the AAOE webinar series, The Data Warehouse. This three-part series is sharing information on the use, value, and application of the data warehouse and how it's going to benefit AAOE members. Today's topic, technical details about the data warehouse. So we're going to be talking about how this thing actually works. We're launching the data warehouse in January 2018, and there's been a lot of buzz about the warehouse. But AAOE leadership and staff want to make sure that you, the members, understand and are comfortable with what a data warehouse is, how it works, and how it connects to your current systems and management processes. I'm your host, Cecilia Sepp, and I'm pleased to be here today with data consultant Brian Bewley, AAOE board member Jason McCormick, and Vicki Sprague of the AAOE staff. So welcome to our series, everyone, and thanks for taking the time to join us today.
Good morning, Cecilia. Thank you.
Morning. Before we get started, I'd like all the panelists to introduce themselves, and we're going to start with Brian. So Brian, if you could tell us a little bit about your company and your role in the Data Warehouse project.
Sure. My company is Stratasy, and we're located in Indianapolis, and we're kind of a boutique consulting company that deals with a lot of big data. We primarily serve the healthcare, financial services sectors. And we've been involved in a number of projects developing data warehouses. We have also been involved in the AAOE benchmarking survey platform development this year. And basically that's what we do, and we try to take data and make it usable for the end user so that they can learn things from the data.
Oh, that's great. That's a great outcome. So Jason, could you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your role in your practice?
Sure. My name is Jason McCormick, and I am the Manager of Process Improvement at Campbell Clinic Orthopedics in Germantown, Tennessee. We are a 51-position practice. We have about 500 staff members, 5 locations, 2 surgery centers, all the bells and whistles. And I'm here serving the group sort of as one of the members of the board of directors and of AAOE, and excited to be here and be involved.
Great, thank you. Welcome to this version of this section of this webinar series. So let's ask Vicki to introduce herself and talk a little bit about her role at AAOE.
Yes, hi, I'm Vicki Sprague. I'm the Director of Data Solutions for AAOE. In that role, I manage the annual benchmarking survey that many of you might be familiar with, and I'm also managing the implementation of the data warehouse, and I'm very excited to talk about it with you today.
Great, well thanks Vicki, and we're glad to have you here on our second segment of the webinar series as well. So Vicki, we're going to start off with you. You're the data person and data expert for the members at AAOE. So we hear the term big data quite often, and big data this, big data that. We've got to do something with big data. Can you tell us what big data actually is?
Yeah, so big data is just really, a repository of information being collected from a lot of different sources. In the case of the data warehouse, it's going to be, it's coming in from all different orthopedic practices. So it's data that exists outside of your organization, your company, your practice, and it's usable to provide context for everything that you're doing. So really, you look outside of your practice or even outside of your region and you look at national big data, and you really can get more information and more context for what you're doing so that you don't feel like you're operating in a vacuum.
And so that sounds like that would be a really important opportunity. So how is it important to supporting a practice?
Yeah, so again, it's providing that context. So, you know, orthopedic practice managers provide a lot of, you know, make a lot of key decisions on a daily basis, and they're involved in strategic planning, and you have to make decisions about compensation and workflow and how do we improve quality of care and all these things. And it's very hard to do that if you don't know how to compare what you're seeing in your practice to what industry standards might be, what other successful practices are seeing. You know, so really it gives them information and data to use to support their decision-making practice. It's very valuable to be able to have that either validation that you're doing something great, or yeah, we're not quite where we want to be in this area, so we need to work to improve it.
So it sounds like it's very applicable too.
Yeah.
So Jason, you're in a very large practice, so you're probably using big data quite often, and you've been involved in a lot of the background development of this data warehouse project. So are there really a lot of ways that people may already be using big data and not realizing they're doing it?
Sure. Yeah, definitely, Cecilia. I think that, you know, a lot depends on the size of the practice, and that's, you know, one of the interesting things about AAOE's membership is that, you know, not only do we have larger practices, kind of like you know, like Campbell Clinic or some of the other larger ones involved, but we also support the very small clinics as well, and the individual practitioner or the, you know, 2 or 3 doctor practices. So yes, I mean, we're using data. Everybody is using data in one way or another. It's just, you know, what resources do you have to, as a practice, to use that data or to collect and then analyze and then turn around and use that to make better decisions. So, you know, from our aspect, you know, we're using data in almost every business decision we're making, from, you know, how many providers we're staffing on certain days in certain areas, and you know, any of our different locations, or, you know, what types of services we're offering or not offering. I mean, every decision is based on some sort of data. And again, going back to what resources you have to throw at it, in our larger practices, or in the, you know, a practice such as ours, we're able to use that data for all kinds of different decisions. You know, looking at quality, looking at contracting, looking at, you know, finance decisions, everything. We're using data. A lot of smaller practices might not be using it that way. They may be using knowledge to make a decision, but that knowledge is really being driven by the data. And so, yes, I mean, we're all using big data in one way or another, but the difference is how we're able to aggregate that. And so the data warehouse is going to be a great way to get all that information together and then begin pushing it out to the membership.
And so it sounds like that'll be a great way for people to consciously use their big data, because I agree that people probably use it all the time not realizing it.
Definitely, and I think it's going to open the door to a lot of, you know, smaller groups with less resources being able to have more access to data and be able to analyze it and utilize that in the decision-making process, you know, where maybe in years previously they haven't been able to.
And so, Brian, that's a great segue over to you. Jason is a person who's actually applying it. He's an end user of data every day in decision making. You're more on the other end of the initial collection of the data. You're a data guy. It's like, I'm bringing in data. You've worked with a lot of different industries. But so what's the most valuable aspect of collecting big data for medical practice?
Well, there's a lot of uses for the data. Let me back up a little bit and talk about the data itself. And one of the things that sets the data warehouse apart from a database, and a lot of people don't understand, you have databases and you have data warehouses, and yes, a data warehouse is a database, but there's a big difference in the way that data is stored and the way that data is analyzed. When you're talking about a database, like a transactional database, you know, Amazon storing transactions, it's all about data integrity and reducing redundant data and breaking that data down into very small individual components. Whereas the data warehouse is all about analyzing and querying that data. So it's organized in a completely different fashion based on how we can glean information from the data. So to the average person looking at a data warehouse, it makes a lot more sense than a very highly compartmentalized database. So it's a data warehouse makes the data more accessible to non-technical people. So that's one of the big benefits that we have, and it exposes things that you don't necessarily see when looking at the data normally. For example, in the benchmarking, the new benchmarking platform that we developed, we're using business intelligence tools that actually behind the scenes look at that data without any human interaction and give us recommendations and say, hey, for example, did you notice that practices in the Midwest states of Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin are averaging 15% higher productivity? And we didn't even see that in the data, but the machine interpreted that and comes back and says, hey, take a look at this. So the data warehouse, it's not some magical tool you put data in and wow, everything pops out, but it exposes lots of things that can help you make better decisions in management.
So you say it exposes a lot of things. How does the machine do that? Do you write a series of algorithms, or does it just like run through data all day long, or how does that work?
Well, in the case of the platform that we're using, in this case, that came from Microsoft Power BI, Business Intelligence.
Oh, okay.
Microsoft writes the algorithms and they do it, but you have to structure your data in such a way that it is able to intelligently go through and look at your data. So that's what we've done. The database underlying the benchmarking survey in 2016's data that just came out is structured in a completely different way than it was in previous years. So you make your data in a particular format, and then you can use AI tools to make recommendations to you.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up AI tools, which is artificial intelligence. So is Microsoft Business Intelligence, or BI, is that actually an artificial intelligence, as in it's thinking for itself, or?
It is in a way. I mean, if you want to think about it, yes, it has algorithms out there that that examine data and make recommendations, and it just sifts through the data, looking at it at every which way you can think of, and spits out little commentaries on what it sees. So yes, it is an artificial intelligence tool.
Wow, how interesting. Okay, because I think, like most people in popular culture, I tend to think of the Terminator with artificial intelligence. But in all seriousness, it's something to keep in mind as we are collecting more and more data, not just for privacy and security issues, but when you see people like Stephen Hawking and Bill Gates caution us against expanding artificial intelligence. I think that this is something, and it may seem like it's not directly on point, but I think it is in today's world as we're more intricately connected, and we are asking people through the AAOE data warehouse to share more and more information. I think it's something that people need to feel comfortable with. And so it sounds like, the Microsoft BI algorithms are something we can be comfortable with. The daily user who may not understand how all these things work could be comfortable with that, because there are a lot of things to worry about, like HIPAA and security.
Yeah. I mean, people use artificial intelligence every day. If you go to Google and you search something, you'll notice sometimes it'll come up and say, "Did you mean this?" or, "Well, how about this?" I mean, that's artificial intelligence right there.
Okay, so all right, so it's tamed to a certain extent. It's not like
not going to be doing a knee replacement anytime soon.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, well, and I think that does relate to the whole topic, just kind of put this into context within larger society, the Internet of Things, because that's what the Internet of Things is. Your refrigerator tells you you're out of milk. The toaster tells you that it's time to turn it on, or it's burning, or whatever. I mean, everything's talking to each other. So everything is talking to each other, and these AI systems do access big data like this. So I think it's something to keep in mind, just, for more understanding of it. So, let's throw us back to Vicki. And it's going to be collecting a lot of data, as we were just talking about, and it's going to be able to be used in a lot of different ways. You've just pulled up on the screen your flow chart. Could you walk us through the flow chart so that the audience and and members can understand how this works, like how the data comes in and then where it goes.
Yeah, so, really, the way we're designing the data warehouse, there'll be multiple ways for data to come into the data warehouse, and it will depend on a lot of things that we're working really hard to establish. If you have an existing EMR, and we're able to work with them to create a direct connection into the data warehouse, that's the ideal, because then you're collecting the data on a regular basis. We define what data we're looking for. We can create what's called an API connection, so that data is transferred without any additional work from you to get that data from your system into the data warehouse. And so that could work for EMRs or from practice management systems, analytic tools you might be using. There's a lot of potential there, and we're pursuing those so that we can establish those connections. Some people are going to have EMRs that we don't have API connections with, so we need a way for you to be able to create a report, run a report, export it to Excel into a template that we define within the data warehouse, and then we upload it into something we're going to call the data import wizard. So there's mapping that is involved with both of those tools, both the data import wizard and the API connection that Stratasy is working on developing, so that when you run that report, you're able to upload it, and then your process is done in terms of getting data into the data warehouse. And then there's, the other set of practices who some don't even have an EMR, or some of them aren't going to have the reports built in to do this. So we can provide data entry templates to them so they have a way to enter their data into those templates and feed it into the data warehouse. And the other piece you see on the top here in terms of the survey portal, we are also working on ways so that you can create a link. Here's a survey that we want to do, Net Promoter Score or whatever satisfaction survey that we are going to put in here, in terms of CG CAPS and all these other satisfaction surveys, and create a link that you can use. Looks like it comes from your practice. You give that link to your patients, and they can fill out the survey, the satisfaction survey, the patient reported outcome survey, and that data will feed directly back into the data warehouse. So again, you're not doing any additional work. And then, later on in the process, you're able to look into that data because you're going to be getting reporting back on all these areas, patient reported outcomes, quality measures, patient satisfaction surveys. You're going to have these customized interactive reports that you can filter by specialty of your physicians or your providers or your practice size or your region and state. So all of the functionality that we see in our benchmarking reports right now are going to be able to appear in the other reports that we're building as part of the data warehouse. And then that reporting to CMS as part of MIPS and the regulatory process is also something we're pursuing in terms of the registry that I know we'll talk about some more. So, and the other point I was going to make there is that the benchmarking survey that we do already have will be part of this data warehouse. It's all built on the same platform. As Brian mentioned, we have an AAOE data portal, which right now a lot of people are using to view our benchmarking results. The same portal will be used for the data warehouse, and if you participate in the data warehouse, you'll have access to the quality measures, patient reported outcomes, the satisfaction results based on what data you contribute. You get access to those reports, and over time we'll be able to use some of the same technology in terms of how we're getting the data into the data warehouse to help make that benchmarking survey even more efficient to complete. So it's not a lot less manual entry and a lot more of direct transfer of information.
Well, and just a point of information for those of us who don't work with data all the time, could you explain what API stands for?
Right, I'm going to give that to you. Do you know what API stands for?
Application Programmers Interface, an API. It's just any method for developers to interface with multiple systems together.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you. That's a great definition. So let's throw this over to Jason. Jason, you have an expertise in quality, the whole area of quality and quality issues related to healthcare delivery. So how is the data warehouse going to support the development of the Qualified Clinical Data Registry, which is also known as a QCDR?
So I think one of the main points to know in the very beginning is to recognize the difference in between a registry and a QCDR. So a CMS-approved registry is basically just, there's lots of them that are out there. There's CMS-approved listing of them, and these are people that are going to capture MIPS, quality metrics. So they're going to capture those metrics, you're going to report them to them, and then they are able to, in turn, report that to CMS on your behalf. So the difference between just a simple registry and a QCDR is that a QCDR actually collects more information than just the CMS-approved quality metrics. And then that information can also be reported not only to CMS on your behalf, but can be reported in different directions, can be reported back to you as well, so that it's more valuable to the practice, or maybe from a regulatory standpoint, it is an additional chunk of information that you're submitting to CMS for kind of, it's for the overachievers in the room. We're shooting above and beyond. We're not only are we doing the minimum, we're going for the, all the gusto. So the QCDR, what it's really going to do is allow us to capture a lot of those metrics that aren't necessarily MIPS quality metrics. Okay, so anybody, as people are beginning to get more involved in looking at MIPS and understanding, the quality metrics and the, advancing care information measures and all of these different things, there's a lot of different places there that groups can earn their MIPS participation points by just being involved in a registry or just being involved in a QCDR. So you're gonna earn a lot of points that way just from being involved. But you're also going to begin to earn the points that come through the reporting and, meeting the measure requirements of submitting quality information, patient satisfaction information, all the different functional outcome scores, and all of those different things that we can capture using a QCDR that you may not be able to capture only using a limited registry. And again, this is something that historically has never really been available to orthopedics. Yes, there has been, one or two maybe registries that were out there that some orthopedics could submit data to, but what we normally found was that, the individual orthopedic practice, the physician practice, they usually weren't able to get involved in that registry because hospitals were already submitting data on their behalf. And so it kind of left the orthopedics in a void. We didn't really have anywhere to go to or anybody to submit this information to. And so, what AAOE is putting together is really a first. It's a place that the orthopedic practice can go and submit their data and be involved in a data warehouse, a QCDR, a registry, whatever you want to call it. We can be involved and not have to worry about taking an exclusion or getting the government giving us some sort of hardship, exemption. So it's a little bit different, and it's going to, as we go through these, you're going to see all the different places that we'll be able to check the boxes simply because we're involved in the QCDR.
Well, that's a great endorsement for participating in the data warehouse over the long term as well, being able to do that. And that's very specialty specific. So Brian, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about QCDR use and submitting data, because you have a broader view of that as well, some positives for people to use a QCDR as far as like maybe they get more money or they get their payments faster, or what other sorts of benefits might there be overall?
Well, one of the biggest benefits, and I apologize, I was looking for the article I found from CMS that you and I had talked about earlier, and I could not find it again, but one of the biggest benefits of using the QCDR is the fact that there's a much higher success rate of having data go through and not being kicked back for data issues or eligibility issues. Because the QCDR has all of that data validation in place, we're validating TINs, tax ID numbers, we're validating NPI numbers against national databases. there's a much lower error rate when you're submitting through a QCDR. And so your chances of getting dinged, or your chances of qualifying for everything you should be getting and not penalized, are much greater through the QCDR. And like I said, I'm sorry I couldn't find that statistic, but it was significant, the difference between individual practices and group practices submitting and those going through a QCDR.
And so the QCDR seems to provide a smoother, more positive outcome in the end. And Jason's already talked a lot about the value of a practice being in a QCDR. So Vicki, could you explain a little bit about what's the process for establishing a QCDR as opposed to a CMS approved registry? Because that's what AAOE is working toward, a QCDR. And then what is the anticipated launch date for the AAOE QCDR?
Right. So, there are a lot of components, in terms of a QCDR versus a registry. Really, we're focused on, the QCDR has a lot, as Jason said, a lot of potential in terms of being able to add all those additional elements to it. There'll be new measures that we can add in, we can propose our own measures, for example. And really the process for applying for that is, I think for the QCDR versus the registry, is there additional plans and like a data validation plan that we had to submit that really says how are we going to validate the data that Brian just mentioned to make sure that it on the front end coming in that it's all accurate and complete, so that by the time we do the reporting to CMS we don't have any concerns about things not being accepted or approved. So there, and then it's also the benchmarking methodology. So I think that is very important in terms of how we're interacting with it on the quality improvement side of things. Even though the primary goal might be for that registry reporting, we're making sure we collect the data in a way that you can have the results for quality improvement, that you're comparing your quality results on the measures that we're including in the QCDR to other practices. So again, that quality improvement, that comparison to the industry averages is very important. And we really wanted to go for the QCDR because that is kind of the standard in terms of registry reporting. You can apply to be a qualified registry. It's not as stringent as being a QCDR, but it just provides additional opportunities. And we have a good experience in our first year, and then we can expand it from there. So there is a application process that we have to go through to get approved to become a QCDR. We have completed the required self-nomination process and submitted that to CMS, and they're in the process of reviewing that, and we hope that we'd hear the outcome of that in a month or two, so and be able to share that. So it's kind of under review right now.
Okay, and so do you anticipate that being ready to launch? We've had a question from the audience about the QCDR status. So do you expect that to launch in January when the data warehouse opens, or do you expect the QCDR to come later?
Yeah, I don't have a definite answer because I don't have a definite timeline from CMS in terms of when they are going to announce the approved QCDRs for 2018. So we would have that approval at the same time that every other QCDR has their approval, because even if you were a QCDR last year, everybody had to go through the same self-nomination form. So we're not the only ones that don't know yet whether we've been approved to become a QCDR. So, as soon as the CMS posts that list, that's when we'll know, and hopefully it will be in January. Last year it was much later, like in March, but they have really refined their process. The self-nomination was also due much earlier this year, so I'm hopeful that we would be able to confirm that QCDR status by the end of this year, but I can't do that.
Well, that's great, but the data warehouse does launch in January, so that data is going to be available. And eventually the QCDR will launch too in tandem with that. So we're talking a lot about the data warehouse and collecting all this information and having a QCDR and the practical application of it, but we have to face the fact that in an interconnected world we're going to get hacked. It just happened to me this morning right before I signed on the webinar. I clicked on something and it took me to a link, and all of a sudden somebody tried to take over my computer, and so I had to shut my computer down and turn it back on to escape the clutches of the online hacker. So Brian, what is Stratasy doing to protect the AAOE data warehouse?
Well, Obviously, you can't do everything, as is
Right.
evidenced by some of the places that have been hacked. But I can tell you this: I mentioned at the beginning that we specialize in big data and healthcare, financial data. We deal with several banks, insurance companies, hospitals. We have gone through the extensive process of having our data center and our processes certified by the HITRUST Alliance. So we are HITRUST certified, which is a whole series of tests and compliance checks and on-site visits from auditors to our offices and data centers. Everything. We have cameras at the doors. We have biometric scanning to get anywhere near the servers. We have multi-factor authentication even internally for our servers. So we have been through a rigorous process that was initiated actually by one of our customers, who's I won't name them, but a very large health insurance company. But that's something also that has to be renewed every 2 years. So I mean, it's a constant program. It's not like you pass an audit and then you walk away. There are things that we have to do daily to maintain that HITRUST certification. It's a very expensive process to go through, but well worth it. And so you can rest assured that the data from the data warehouse is going to be in HITRUST certified facilities and geographically redundant as well. So it's not like it's sitting on a box and we had a problem. It's distributed, it's a cluster, and it's distributed across geographical regions.
And can you give us just very briefly a background on who is the HITRUST Alliance?
Well, the HITRUST Alliance was started by, I believe, a consortium of insurance companies, hospitals, medical providers, medical device manufacturers. It literally was put together by a consortium of people from the healthcare industry, and it is specific to healthcare. So you can learn all about HITRUST at hitrustalliance.net, and you can read about the founders and what the certification requirements are.
Oh, that's great, and I think that's important for the audience to hear too, within context of a HITRUST certified company like yours, because it's people like them who started this. So that's great. So I think that ensures a level of confidence. So Vicki, was there anything you wanted to add about security from your side of the project?
Yeah, I think, obviously security is #1 priority whenever we're collecting data. That's true for all the data we've collected in the past for benchmarking survey. And now, now that we're collecting data on patient satisfaction and patient reported outcomes and quality, which comes from patient data, it really required us to think even more about how we're keeping that secure. So that went into the selection of the Stratasy as our partner in this, to be able to, because they do have experience, they do have the HITRUST certification. That was very important when we're selecting the vendor for all these things. So that's #1 priority. We will manage that the confidentiality of the data both as it's coming in, make sure it's protected as it's stored in the data warehouse, and then on reporting that we make sure that your confidentiality is protected. You will see your own practices data, you will see aggregated industry data. You will not be able to identify individual practices that exist outside of you. So it's where you have multiple layers of protection for the data that is going to be provided. We're also working through agreements that are necessary when we're collecting this patient level data, so that you are comfortable with the use of the data that we are going to have, what your rights in that process are, and so on.
Great, thank you. Because obviously the security of the data is going to be key, especially for, again, the confidence of the end user. And then, Jason, as a practice administrator, how is HIPAA related to the security of the data? Are there any issues that the audience should be aware of?
Well, I think that the #1 thing is just, having the faith in the standards that are required in order to get to a program, or being a certified program such as a QCDR. They're extremely laborious and stringent, and they make you check all their boxes and meet all their requirements. And of course, one of those is dealing with the confidentiality and the safety of all of that patient information. So I think that, you know, the simple fact that we're going, you know, we're shooting for the stars here, we're going for the QCDR, we're going to have sort of the highest, you know, security that you can when it comes to this. So, you know, from a practice standpoint, I feel very comfortable in, you know, that information being shared with AAOE and with the data warehouse, and then getting that information back because of those standards that you know, CMS is approving. And to be honest with you, if you know, if there were anything to happen, I'm going to direct that question right back at CMS. I'm going to say, well, you approved it. You know, let them give me an answer. But no, I do. I believe that, you know, the standards that are there and the requirements that you know, Brian and his team have to meet, you know, make it very secure and very safe and easy to feel okay with what's happening with that data.
So, and that's a great segue to a question I have for Brian about some practical benefits of using the data warehouse for submitting to CMS, as Jason was just talking about. You talked a little bit, Brian, about the data being accepted at a higher rate, but are there some other practical benefits to using the data warehouse for communicating with CMS?
Well, one of the things that the QCDRs are being pushed to do going forward is to use the new QPP API, which is a new JSON-based API for submission. And that, if you're a non-technical audience, I just said a bunch of acronyms there that don't mean anything to you. But from the tech nerd side, for us, what that new API that they're providing does is it gives instant feedback. Whereas before you would upload a QRDA3 file, or individuals would upload a QRDA1, stuff would go up and it would get parsed, analyzed. You might get an email back later, 24 hours, could be a week. Whereas the API now, you basically initiate a conversation with their server using that API that we talked about, that application programming interface, and you get immediate feedback. So if you submit a measure, within seconds you get something back that tells you, okay, here's the measure, it was acknowledged, here's your ID, it was accepted. So the feedback that you get from your data is going to be much faster going through the QCDR using the new JSON API.
Great. Okay. And so, Jason, how is that, what Brian just outlined for us, going to relate to improved quality outcomes and then the move to value-based payments, since we all are looking at that coming in the next few years?
Sure. Well, let me start by taking exactly what Brian just said and putting an example to it. So with what Brian said about how, you know, reporting those old metrics, or the old ways, using the reporting methodologies that were out there, and how you may wait for 2 or 3 weeks or whatever it was before you got some email. So you know, there has been examples, and Campbell Clinic being one of those. We actually did report through PQRS for one of the regulatory programs several years ago, using that exact report. I can't even think of it was the 3, whatever Brian said, the 3, number 1. There you go. And we actually did use that report, and we submitted it successfully, and we got the confirmation it was submitted successfully. And lo and behold, you know, about 5 or 6 weeks later, we received something in the mail from CMS saying that we had, you know, failed to meet the quality metrics for PQRS, and we were going to be assessed a penalty. And, you know, obviously as a practice, we were like, no, we didn't fail that. We need to go back and look at it, and what actually happened. And you know, there was some errors, I think, actually in the report that was built by you know, the EHR or somebody at that time, and it actually hit a lot of practices that were on that one EHR, and that we actually you know, were going to fail PQRS for that year, except for the fact that they were able to identify the mistake. CMS allowed them to fix the mistake and for us to resubmit. So we were able to come through it on the positive side. But the important thing is exactly what Brian just said. Using that API, we're going to get an immediate answer. And if something doesn't look right, you're going to know immediately. And so there wasn't that 5 or 6 weeks lag time where you think everything's gone through. Now you're finding out immediately that there's a problem or that there isn't a problem. And so it's a lot easier to kind of put yourself at rest. Now, how does that relate to quality outcomes of value-based payment? Well, the quality outcomes is pretty easy. You're using that for the data submission, and so you're able to find out whether your data meets the requirements, whether it doesn't meet the requirements, whatever that may be. Value-based care, you're able to stay in real time. You're going to be able to stay on top of your data, compare it to your other people, compare it to yourself, compare it by whether it's your doctors or a specific subspecialty, one of the 7, for orthopedics or whatever it is. This is real-time data that you're able to submit. You're able to look at it compared to other groups, other providers. You're able to use that with your payers, your contracts, your employers. You're able to use that data real-time to make some sort of business decision. So yes, I think using those APIs and the things that we would like to build with the different EHRs, in order to get that data into the data warehouse, it's going to be better for the practices. It's going to be less work for the practices. Hopefully, we're going to have no issues with the EHRs that we have identified and want to reach out to, because to them it's a benefit to get on board, because the more of their practices that are using this, it's better for them. They're able to use that as a selling point, and so we're going to specifically target the bigger orthopedic specific EHRs, those EHRs that are cater to a lot of orthopedic practices, so that we can make sure we have those APIs. So that's going to help all groups. Again, that goes back to the point of, one of the best things about AAOE is the fact that membership is for everybody. And, not only the big practices that have the resources to throw the money at the APIs and the creation of that, now we're helping out the smaller practices that don't have those resources. And we're getting those APIs built so that you can participate in the data warehouse or in value-based practice or whatever it may be. So there's a lot of different reasons that it all kind of comes together to be beneficial for us in the long run.
That's a great point, Jason, and an excellent jumping off point for my next question for Vicki is, how does this all translate into a member benefit? Jason mentioned AAOE is for everyone, but let's frame this as a member benefit. How does that fit into that part of your AAOE experience?
Yeah, so, really we're designing a system that is going to be a benefit for practices of all sizes. We focused a lot in the last few minutes on the registry piece, and we know that there are a lot of practices in our membership that have experience reporting to registries, are thinking about reporting with a registry, so they're ready to do that quality reporting and that registry reporting right now, and so it's just a matter of what's the best way for them to get the data to us, and we're working really hard on that. There are also practices that, reporting quality measures to CMS is not even on their radar. Either they're not accepting Medicare or Medicaid, or they're just not ready, and they're like, okay, we're going to wait as long as we can. As long as CMS will allow us to wait, we're going to do so. So we're not ready for the quality piece, but we are ready for patient-reported outcomes. We are ready for patient satisfaction, and we want to get that comparison data right away because we want to use that for quality improvement purposes. So the system is, you don't have to do all of it. If you're not ready for registry, there's still something in the data warehouse for you. So you can collect patient satisfaction surveys. Maybe that's all you want to do in this first year is patient satisfaction. Okay, we can talk about that, and we'll create a patient satisfaction tool that works for you. You get that into the data warehouse, you get feedback on how your patient satisfaction results compare to others. And those are, some are already doing patient satisfaction and know they need to move to patient-reported outcomes. So we have identified patient-reported outcomes that are going to really be relevant across your specialty, for different procedures and specialists within your practice. So, that we have a way to get started. And we're going to create the survey portal and the data import wizard that we mentioned, API connection, all these things so that you can get started where it makes most sense for you to get started, get familiar with the data warehouse and all the reporting capabilities that it will have, and then expand and grow as you're ready to move into quality or these other areas.
So that's a great member benefit because it grows with you and expands to your needs, and you can go into the warehouse and find what you want. So we've had a question, we're checking our time here because we have an hour today. We have a question from the audience, which I think, Brian, we're going to throw to you because it relates to a question I have for you about building the data warehouse, which is something you and I had talked about as we prepped for today. And you said it's still under construction, basically. So we have a question from the audience that says, which EMRs do you plan to work with initially? So is there a limited number of people? Yeah, is there a limited number of EMRs you're going to be able to work with, or will they all be able to work with it? And then how does that relate into the build?
Well, I'll let Vicki address the who specifically, because I think there's already some that have committed to.
Oh, great. Okay.
But basically, we are developing and will make available our API that anybody can write to. It's a standard web service API. We'll provide the documentation, work with any vendor, and say here's your credentials and here's the API documentation. So basically, we're gonna expose that to any system, no matter they're the biggest or the smallest. I believe, but there are some that are targeted. I think Jason mentioned that we're going after some of these ones that, that have a lot of orthopedic practices as users. I think Vicki's probably better suited to answer, though, which ones we already know that we're going after.
Okay,
right.
So Vicki.
Well, and I'm going to be vague because, we really don't have those signed agreements for certain EMRs to share the data. I know what my wish list is. I know based on the benchmarking survey data, other surveys we've done, we know which EMRs are most frequently used across our AAOE membership. Those are the ones that we're going to start targeting first. So really, and it's really, as we have this conversation, it's a benefit to them, I think, as Jason said, to participate in that, just as it'll benefit our members in terms of the ease of use, in terms of getting data into the data warehouse. So we really feel we have a good plan, and a good selling point for those EMRs, those practice management systems, those other data analytics companies to create these API connections once the API is finalized, and just say, hey, you can offer to your customers, either current or potential, that you have a direct feed into the data warehouse. So it's a really compelling case for them. So we will let you know who those EMRs as soon as we have final agreements with them. I think it's a little premature for me to share that right now, but in the coming weeks, we will be able to give you that answer.
So you're building that out at this point. But in the future, it sounds like Brian and Vicki that any EMR could connect to the warehouse. If they just have to make the choice to do it.
From a technical side, it's possible, yes, for anybody.
Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit. We are coming up near the end of our hour, and there's a few more questions I'd like to throw out. So, Brian, could you quickly talk a little bit about the phases of growth of the data? So, will all the data be available immediately in January when it launches, or are there going to be a series of levels of collection of data and availability of data?
Well, I mean, to some extent, the data comes from the practices. So it's, we launched the data warehouse. We don't have their data yet. So, but the ability to, for example, create your own surveys, your own patient satisfaction surveys, will be there. The standardized surveys, the COOS, the HOOS, the CAPS, those will be there. Your ability to be able to say, hey, I want to send these out. So that will be there. That data will be there. But we're giving practices the ability to define their own questions, their own measures. If they want to start collecting data, they can design their own input forms and their own import templates, and start putting data in. But the structure will be in place. But like I say, the data comes from the practices, doesn't come from us. So yeah, the functionality will be there.
I see. So in a way, it is like a warehouse. It'll be there and it'll be waiting for people to fill it up.
Correct.
But there will be the systems to take the data out once the data starts to come in. So I guess you can look at it as the reports are like the shelves that you'll be putting the data on, or you'll be putting the data on shelves and it comes out through the reports.
Right. I mean, the framework is in place. You know, until we get a completed survey in the system, there's really nothing to report on yet. But you know, just to talk about the data warehouse a little bit more in context, the data warehouse is not something that you say, we're done. We built the data warehouse. A data warehouse is really it's a framework, and it's the capability of collecting disparate data from all different systems, putting it together, and then making intelligent decisions based on that data. And that data is going to constantly grow. The data warehouse is going to become more and more useful over time as we grow the data and as we see new areas to start capturing and exploring. I give you an example. One of the first data warehouses I worked on was for a manufacturing company back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it started out very small. It only had one single function in that company. And you know, by the time 7 years later came, it tracked everything from an idea in an R&D meeting all the way to return of products after it had actually been developed, designed, manufactured, shipped, and returned. And it didn't start out that way, obviously, but by the time that their data warehouse was completed, we were making decisions like how to space machinery and adding 12 inches between machines so that we could accommodate left-handed versus right-handed assembly line workers. So, you know, our profile of employees came to, you know, be collecting whether or not they were predominantly right-handed or left-handed. We would have never thought of that until we started seeing analytics data that certain people that were high performers on one product were very low performers on another product, and had to do with the way that the machines were oriented. So a data warehouse is just going to grow in use over time. And I mean, it's really exciting, the possibilities down the road once you start seeing that data, analyzing it, and then saying, okay, what's the next question we need to be asking? So that's the real power of the data warehouse. It's not something that on January 1 you flip a light switch on and say, well, we got a data warehouse. Mm-hmm. So
that's a great example of the long-term use of data too, in the rearranging of processes, how you do things.
Right.
So very close. I mean, we are unfortunately come very close to the end of our hour at this point. So Brian, could you very quickly explain what end-to-end electronic reporting is, how it relates to CMS, and what is the benefit of doing it?
Well, apparently there is a payment bonus based on electronic end-to-end reporting, and that is data coming in electronically from a certified EHR system into a qualified clinical data registry and sent electronically to CMS using their APIs with no human intervention in between that's manually massaging and manipulating data. So they consider that end-to-end electronic reporting. And there is, I'm not sure which payment year it's coming. If it's Jason, probably would be able to answer that better than I would, but there is a bonus for doing end-to-end electronic reporting. Okay. Now, I don't think that year one we're going to be there. Vicki could probably tell you that, because one of the things we're doing right now is we're targeting, you know, some of the smaller practices, letting them participate in the QCDR, but they may not be sending their data into us through a certified EHR system. So that's you know, kind of a caveat there to being able to do electronic end-to-end reporting if you're not electronic in your practice.
So Jason, that's a great segue to you jumping back in the conversation. So what payment year is that bonus going to apply, and then how's that going to benefit people in their practice outside of the bonus?
Well, I I'm not exactly sure whether that, I'm still reading through the 1,500 pages that were just released last week. Haven't gotten to that page yet, but I'll let you know when I do. But I don't know. I don't think it's anything within the first year. I do think that there is something like that. I'm not sure if it's exactly what Brian's referring to, but definitely something there in the second year. But I mean, the thing is that that's one specific bonus payment that he's talking about. There's lots of opportunities for bonus points, which is basically how you meet the MIPS or the macro requirements. So being involved in a QCDR period, that in and of itself is a way of earning bonus points, which can lead to your neutral or positive payment adjustment. So again, it goes back to there's lots of reasons to be involved, but even on just speaking on a purely MIPS level, there's lots of reasons to be involved, based on your participation and bonus points and getting positive adjustments. So all of that's there, and I think that as we continue that value-based, that transfer into value-based care, we're just going to see that become more important.
So, Vicki, could you add anything to the benefits of the electronic reporting? Is there anything that we haven't heard?
I think, what my thought was is that, it supports the fact that, what Brian said, the data warehouse is growing, both in terms of the data that we're collecting and the sophistication that we can build into the process, and, the EMRs that we hope to partner with, some of them might meet the certified EHR technology requirement and be able to do the end-to-end, but, we'll have to really evaluate that. And if we don't do that in this year, in 2019, that is totally realistic for us to do. So I think we need to build. This is a huge project, that we're rolling out, trying to get it to our members as soon as possible, so we can start in 2018 really using this big data within our practices for quality improvement and hopefully for this registry reporting piece. There's going to be tremendous value in year one of our data warehouse, and it's only going to grow from there as we're able to add additional partners, additional resources, additional data elements. We hear from members on what else they would like to see, what's working well, and it's just going to keep growing. And it's a conversation. It's not a static thing. So as we learn more about what our members will find valuable, those are the things we can work on incorporating. So there's so much potential for growth with this. It's exciting.
So the data warehouse is not just going to launch and be done as an evolutionary process. So Jason, as a member, as a practice administrator, and as a board member of AAOE, what is your soundbite for the importance of members participating in this data warehouse?
I think that it goes without saying. I think that the importance is not only for your future in orthopedics or your future as a practice in orthopedics. This is going to be how you are helping to make the decisions on a day-to-day basis in the upcoming landscape of business of an orthopedic practice and business of healthcare, period. So the more involved that you can be, and I understand again the small one or two physician groups that don't have the resources. You're not, as everybody said, we're not looking for, you don't have to be participating at the same level as a 50-60 group provider or a 50-60 provider group. It's going to be small, but the value that's going to come from it is something that you're going to build over time, and I won't get into it, but you can go and find a list of the current or the 2017 QCDRs that were Medicare approved or CMS approved, and you can see what the cost is for participating in some of those groups. And you're looking at an average, between the 20, the 40 or whatever that they had, you're looking at an average of, $299 up to $899 per provider per year. And because this is something that is strictly going through AAOE and is, meant for our membership, we're able to offer this at a much, a drastically reduced cost. So you're going to get all of the value and, without the cost of any of those same registries. And, that's something that I think that as a practice I want to be involved in. As a board member, I'm hoping that we're able to use this to bring in more groups, because the more groups that we can bring into AAOE, the more robust our data gets, the better comparison. And that just helps us in the long run. So I think that it's extremely valuable for all of us to really be as engaged as we can.
So, and Vicki, that leads us to our last question of today's session, which is, how does a member participate in the warehouse? Where do they sign up?
Sure. So, it's really easy to get started. Let us know that you have an interest in the data warehouse and that you intend to participate at whatever level that might be for you. You can go to the AAOE website, and under resources, there is an option for the data warehouse. So you can click there, get all information, and towards the bottom of the page, there is a big sign up now button. So that will get you to a form that you can complete, tell us a little bit about your practice, how many providers, both physicians and other providers, you're interested in signing up. And that gets a form to us, and then we'll go through the rest of the sign up process with you.
Great, thank you, Vicki. And the Data Warehouse series has touched on a lot of different topics. Today we talked about the technical aspects. It seems complicated, but basically it's the collection and analysis of data you already have. And by contributing to the data warehouse, you create a much more valuable asset and benefit for orthopedics across the board, specifically for AAOE members. So I would like to thank our panelists, Brian Bewley of Stratasy, Jason McCormick, AAOE board member and practice administrator, and Vicki Sprague of AAOE staff, who is also the data guru in a lot of ways for everyone. So I want to thank you all for being here today. Join us tomorrow for part 3 of the Data Warehouse webinar series, Data Warehouse Logistics, which is tomorrow, November 9th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm Cecilia Sepp. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you for part 3. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.